Well, good morning to everybody. Welcome. And we're starting off with the first bill out of the chute, and we're going to be all right. I'm proud to present to you the fiscal year 2024 Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies appropriations bill. And this bill is fully funded. It fully funds veterans' health care, matches the President's budget request for veterans' benefits, other veterans' programs, and the VA activities and functions. We kept our promise, and we did it responsibly. We did not accept the proposed shift of more than $14 billion to the mandatory side of the budget. Instead, we utilized cost of war toxic exposure fund as extended to cover the increment cost above the FY21 baseline to implement the PACT Act. The bill provides almost $1 billion above the budget request for military construction and family housing. I am pleased we were able to provide $360 million for barracks and $294 million for child development centers. We also continue to the subcommittee's initiatives for laboratories, planning and design, and family housing. I specifically want to call out the funding in this bill for deterrence in the Pacific, which I believe we all should support. The bill provides $1.4 billion for Pacific deterrence initiatives, $1.1 billion for projects in Guam, and $1.3 billion for projects in Guam, and $131 million for Indo-PACOM. We also direct the VA to improve services for veterans in the Pacific, and we need to do better to honor their service to this nation. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for participating in the process. Your input made a much better bill. I also want to thank my ranking member, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. She knows I consider her a great partner, and I truly appreciate her. And I thank you for working with us on everything we do. We don't always agree, but we can disagree agreeably. Thank you. I want to thank the Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member Delora for their support and assistance with our subcommittee. And with that, I yield to Ms. Wasserman Schultz for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. And I, too, have appreciated the work that we've done together over the past few years, which makes it all the more heartbreaking that I cannot support this bill for a variety of reasons that I'll outline during my remarks. As part of the Republicans' Default on America bill that they just recently passed, they included no protections for veterans funding, despite making promises that their proposed cuts would not impact veterans. Verbal promises clearly mean nothing when they could have included those protections in law, ensuring veterans funding would not be subject to political funding battles, and they made the conscious choice not to do so. On top of that, Republicans voted to immediately rescind $2 billion for veterans for claims processing and appeals, health care both within and outside of VA, research, and education and training for veterans. The bill before us today continues the Republicans' disturbing trend that does not protect veterans. My friend Chairman Carter was quoted this week saying this FY24 Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill is written to an imaginary top line. So clearly the bill before us is nothing more than a messaging bill. And the message Republicans are sending to the American people is that they are not interested in protecting veterans. In spite of the imaginary top line of this bill, it still underfunds our commitment to our veterans. Just last summer, we passed historic, monumental legislation on a bipartisan basis, the PACT Act, to better serve and better take care of our veterans of all wars who have been exposed to harmful chemicals like Agent Orange, burn pits, and other toxic substances. As part of that legislation, we established, again, on a bipartisan basis, the Cost of War Toxic Exposures Fund to ensure the steep cost of health care and services related to toxic exposures will always have its own dedicated funding stream. That funding for toxic exposures should not have to compete with other discretionary priorities. That was the whole point of creating it. That funding for toxic exposures is so important and necessary that we provided its own funding source to ensure that we keep our promise to our veterans to take care of them. This bill does not keep that promise. The President's budget requested $20 billion for the Toxic Exposures Fund, and this bill only provides $5.5 billion. Not only does that mean that the Toxic Exposures Fund is underfunded by $14.7 billion, it means that Republicans chose to fill the hole this decision creates with scarce discretionary dollars, denying the guaranteed funding we promised veterans when we passed the PACT Act. Please do not tell me that Republicans are fully funding veterans programs. The larger Republican agenda, and this bill is a black and white example of that, does nothing to protect veterans from cuts to services. On the Milcon side of the bill, we don't have a better story to share here either. This bill actually cuts funding for service members and their families by $1.3 billion compared to the enacted level, compared to current services. That's what that means. This bill actually appropriates less funding than the bill that we enacted last year. We have a recruitment and retention problem, and Republicans are cutting funding for military construction. 30% of our military construction budget, 30% of our infrastructure worldwide, and this is in the words of our military generals across the globe, are in fair or poor condition. We have a major quality of life issue for our service members, and Republicans are cutting funding for military construction. Republicans cut dedicated funding for PFAS remediation and cleanup in this bill, dedicated funding for military installation, climate change, and resilience projects, and dedicated funding for the oversight of privatized housing. Does the mistreatment of our service members this committee shined a spotlight on no longer matter to our Republican colleagues? We've been working so hard these past few years to hold the privatized housing providers to account and to work with the department to provide better resources for families to protect them from poor housing conditions, and this bill backtracks on our progress. We are backtracking on our commitment to our service members and their families. Lastly, I would be remiss if I did not mention how disappointing the community funding project process has been this year. It's disappointing that Republicans wouldn't give us an allocation that would support the 7 Democratic projects that were submitted to this subcommittee. This bill is only able to provide $15.3 million for Democratic CPFs when over $400 million was requested, but it did support $279 million for Republican CPFs. CPFs are capped at 1% of the discretionary top line, and that top line is at the 2022 spending levels this year. Democrats did not treat Republicans this way when we were in the majority. In fact, we fully funded Republican CPFs that were executable. This is just one more way that Republicans are shortchanging the American people. I cannot in good conscience support this bill, and it saddens me. I've been in a leadership role on this subcommittee since 2014, and I have never felt more sickened and sad about the product that we are producing today. I've never had to make remarks like this in a subcommittee markup in the Milcon VA bill, and I hope that we can work together to address these concerns. The subcommittee has a longstanding tradition of bipartisanship. I think the world of the chairman. I hope that we can work together in good faith going forward to take care of our veterans, service members, and their families in the way they deserve, but this bill does not do that. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you for presenting the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Bill, the first appropriations bill we'll consider for the fiscal year 2024. I appreciate the work that you've done on this bill. Without our markups this week, we'll demonstrate how, with our markups this week, we'll demonstrate how we're able to reduce overall spending without impacting our commitment to veterans, national defense, and homeland security. This bill before us fully and responsibly funds veterans' health care. It will ensure that our veterans get the medical treatment they certainly deserve. I also reject the administration proposal to shift resources to the mandatory side. This bill covers those costs in the annual discretionary budget. The bill also prioritizes our nation's heroes by providing critical funding for military bases and facilities, improving the quality of life for our service members and their families, and ensuring our veterans have a dignified final resting place. It's a strong bill, and I hope all members will support it. To close, I want to thank the subcommittee members and staff, both majority and minority, for their hard work on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Oh, Ms. DeLauro, welcome.
Thank you.
Didn't
Thank
see
you.
when you
Nice
came
to
in.
see you. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. This is the first markup for fiscal year 2024. And quite honestly, I wish I could say that I'm happy to be here. But we are operating under unique, potentially harmful circumstances. So I would like to take a moment to set the stage. House Republicans just passed a bill that imposes harmful cuts on more than 22%. Here we sit discussing a funding bill that has been marked up to what Chairman Carter referred to as, and this is a quote, an imaginary top line, and is completely detached from reality. It was written because House Republicans voted on a bill last month that immediately rescinds $2 billion for veterans. And that is Section 201, if anyone wants to look it up. $2 billion is rescinded for veterans and fails to include language to protect them from the harmful cuts that you all want to impose. And veterans were paying attention. They saw you take that vote and realized that you had to put something out there so that you could fix your message. Still, after knowing this is a messaging bill that is only one small piece of the pie, this bill falls short of our commitment to veterans. Just this past summer, not even a year ago, Congress passed the Honoring Our PACT Act bill on a bipartisan basis. It was a vote of 342 to 88 to expand health care and benefits to veterans exposed to Agent Orange, burn pits, and other toxic substances. Even though a few of you on this subcommittee did not vote for the PACT Act, but those promises were paired with a pledge in law to provide the necessary funding, dedicated funding, to carry out the PACT Act. This bill breaks that promise. The Department of Veterans Affairs carefully calculated what was required for the Toxic Exposures Fund, and the department responsibly requested $20 billion for the Toxic Exposures Fund for 2024. This bill barely makes a dent in it. The Republicans have only provided $5.5 billion for the Toxic Exposures Fund, barely a quarter of what is required for this year. That is a betrayal, leaving $14.7 billion to be funded with non-defense discretionary funds. And if I might be able to take a moment, I would like to quote a group of people that are known as Vote Vets, where they say, "The utter disregard congressional Republicans have for our veterans is astonishing and shameful. Veteran victims of burn pits and other toxic exposure were made a promise under the PACT Act that their care and benefits would be guaranteed. The Republicans in Congress are now proposing we toss that guarantee in the garbage and put funding at risk on an annual basis. That goes beyond morally reprehensible. It is just plain cruel. Unfortunately, this is now a clear pattern of congressional Republicans threatening our veterans and military families. In my opinion, None of them have a right to wrap themselves in the flag ever again. True patriots don't do what congressional Republicans are doing. And that is from retired Paul Eaton. That's from Vote Vets. Not my words, but theirs. With this funding level, Republicans not only turn their backs on their commitment to our veterans who have been exposed to toxins, it pits veterans against veterans, using them as pawns in the Republicans' gambit to slash other non-defense programs and priorities across the federal government that they know that veterans, service members, and their families rely on. Additionally, Republicans are not protecting the veterans' medical care funding that they do have in the bill. They are proposing to transfer up to $4.5 billion out of medical care programs. This is a house of cards. They are trying to pretend on paper that they are properly funding medical care, but in reality, they are using these critical resources to supplement construction accounts that they woefully underfund. With over $100 billion of needed construction projects, the Republicans rejected the president's request to supplement construction with $1.9 billion in mandatory funds. This is just more of the same of what we saw a few weeks ago. Empty promises without explicit protections for veterans. To quote Congressman David Obey, the former chair of the House Appropriations Committee, this is posing for holy pictures. If we make promises, we should keep them. That is what I have been taught. Lastly, I cannot support this bill without knowing the full slate of 302B allocations. Asking us to vote on the bill without knowing the full picture is disingenuous and is fooling no one. We can see through Republican strategy to release the, quote, easy bills first, funding them as best as they can, but then leaving the rest of the bills with nothing. What is going to happen to SNAP if Republicans cut the agriculture bill by more than 22%? We all know that 1.3 million veterans rely on SNAP. What's going to happen to the housing choice vouchers if Republicans cut the Department of Housing and Urban Development by more than 22%? The answer is obvious. 50,000 veterans who rely on those vouchers for housing will be harmed. What's going to happen to job training programs if Republicans cut the Department of Labor by more than 22%? Veterans who are experienced or at the risk of homelessness would lose the support they so desperately need. These are just a few examples. We need to see all the bills so that we can see the full picture of how these cuts will undoubtedly affect the brave men and women who fought for our country and that we promised to take care of. So do not tell me that Republicans are fully funding veterans programs. The larger Republican agenda does nothing to protect veterans from their proposed cuts. I cannot support this bill, and I hope my Republican colleagues will work with us in full committee. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Anyone else have a comment they want to make? Mr. Valadeo?
Mr. Chair, I move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. It's reported to the committee. Where's the language? Yeah, let me get the language here. Okay, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, would you make the motion?
Mr. Chairman, I ask, I move that staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes.
The request that the staff be granted authority to make technical conforming changes. Is there any opposition? It's granted. Thank you. We'll adjourn. I don't use the gavel. I didn't even use the gavel in the courtroom.